my difficulties. Without further ado, welcome to this second Young Philosophers New York Parent Forum. The theme today is freedom and responsibility, and we have a number of guests here. And our hope is to provide a thoughtful discussion and to provide an example of how a philosophical community of inquiry works. And to do that, I think no one better than have Ariel Sykes here facilitate our discussion. And I'm going to hand it over to her for to kind of kick things off and set up some introductions. So thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Joe, and thank you everyone for coming and joining. This is the first time that we as a community have even met each other. So what I'd like to first do is have each person introduce themselves and what brings them here. And then I'd like them to also say something about a reflection or experience that you've had recently around how living during this pandemic has either changed or challenged your ideas of freedom or responsibility. Would anyone like to start?
I will. I'd be happy to. My name is Mark Arnowitz. Ariel and I met while we were teaching at a few years back. And we became fast friends, and I happen to be her neighbor, and I'm a member of her egg co-op up here in West Milford and Warwick. I've lost some loved ones through this experience. I've also had my world turned upside down. Everything that we do is different. So from moving university courses online to the way we minister to our friends and family. I have a number of cottage industries where I'm on the road all the time and still am here. So I'm out all day. This happened to come at a time when I decided to dedicate the rest of my life to, I guess, more church and altruistic enterprises, and I gave up a well-paying job to do that right before the pandemic. I have a very wide and varied community that I work with, minister to, or am friends with. Everything from delivering coffee to housebound folks to, as a former Lyft driver, giving rides to the community to people that know that I was at one time a Lyft driver. So I'm busy all the time managing these different enterprises. I think what's happened with me is having to turn inward and think about these. Politics have all but disappeared for the moment for me, and I stopped playing the blame game because I look more now towards what this means to each of us as brothers and sisters, and now I'm more willing to admit how fallible we all are, and kind of turn my life over to sort of a higher entity to guide me as to what they want, what this entity or entities would like me to do, as far as ministering and helping other people through servicing others. So here I am, ready to emerge from the pandemic, hopefully alive, and then see how I can do now to help others for the rest of my life. And I will back out of this now.
Thanks, Mark. Would somebody else like to start again? Joel?
Yeah, I could contribute. Obviously, like all of us, this experience of being in this pandemic has kind of, just even from the process of being alone more and being more inward and not having as much conversation with other people, has kind of caused me to look at things more totally in terms of a societal reaction to things. specifically related to today's discussion about responsibility and freedom, I've been thinking a lot about the kind of inverse twins of those two words, which are duty and liberty. And I was thinking kind of the subject matter kind of relates more to the philosophy of how a polity works. To what extent freedom and responsibility are personal things that can only happen subjectively to one person, and the extent to which how much duty do we owe to one another, and how much liberty one is willing to sacrifice to live in a more honored-based kind of concept of living with one another, and to what extent that would be coerced from other people or just automatically expected from someone. But that's what I've been thinking about a lot with the pandemic.
Great, thanks, Joel. Could you tell us a little bit about who you are and what brought you here today?
Yes, I have a very important connection to Ariel. I'm her husband's second cousin's husband, and that might sound unimportant, but within our group, that's very important.
And you're also a father.
I am a father of 2 children, yes. One of them is very good at dealing with force to be inside. He's able to constrain his liberty and feel responsible for others. And the other one, who is 10 years old, would easily go out and protest in a large group against the constraints on her freedom, undoubtedly.
Thank you. Would
Absolutely.
someone else like to go next?
I'll pop in. I'm John Torrey. I'm a professor over at Buffalo State College in the philosophy department, and I know Ariel through the wonderful philosophy learning and teaching organization, as well as Joe, and so happy to be able to participate on this here live stream. And when I think about responsibility, at least for how this pandemic has affected me, I've thought about my responsibility as a professor. So, our students, so Buff State, for example, we get a lot of students from New York City. The kind of responsibility that we have as professors to look after our students and their well-being, and also to try to, the responsibility to still try to, shepherd their intellectual development, even through this kind of a crisis. At least for me, it's been difficult to kind of see how to needle that. How to thread the needle for that, because I didn't want to. I told my students this actually. I don't want to overtax you all. This is as trying a time as any of them are going to experience, particularly during an already trying time just to get through something like college. And so it dawned on me that there may be a responsibility on my end to shift perhaps what I might consider to be the important principles for what I want a student to get out of the class, to ultimately what can I provide the student so that when they leave this experience, they've got something that they can walk away with. And I'm not sure if those two things are different in terms of class formation to navigating what's going on with this, but it certainly has been hammered home for me over the last few weeks that educators have a responsibility, at least to me, to try to respond to meeting the needs of their students, especially in times of crisis like this.
Great, thank you, John.
I'd be happy to tack on to that. First, my name is Joe Beal, and I am the executive director of the Gotham Philosophical Society and Young Philosophers of New York. I also teach college and work with youth, pre-college students for philosophy, and I have 3 children of my own, 8th grade, 7th grade, 2nd grade. Just picking up immediately from John's point, as an educator, I have a kind of this sense of a new sense of responsibility to my students, or a deeper sense of responsibility beyond delivering the content to them. Of we had a syllabus, and these were things we were going to discuss and topics we were going to discuss, and I'm trying to explain to them Aristotle's theory or social contract theory. Now, a number of them need me, it seems, to be there, to kind of show up in a video chat, not just do asynchronous discussion boards, but to be there, to see my face, to have something familiar, to talk about philosophical ideas, but also to talk about this more broadly. I am someone they know and had a peculiar relationship with them, but a number of them need me, not all of them by any stretch, but a number of them do. And I, as a kind of a human, this responsibility to them. We have been brought together, back at the end of January, and so there's this new responsibility that I feel with respect to my own children. And this is something that I know I spoke with Ariel about in our first session. I feel that I have a responsibility to almost be a student, particularly with respect to my second grader. That I need to make sure that the assignments get done. I need to make sure that that some learning happens, and that provides its own challenges and difficulties, and a sense of setting up a standard that am I meeting my responsibilities? So there's a layer of guilt and disappointment because things aren't getting done that, in a sense, I think could be getting done, or on some level, at some moments, I think should be getting done. So it's been extremely challenging in that way. So I could keep talking about this, but I want to bring other people in and their experiences.
Great, thanks, Joe. Does somebody want to introduce themselves? They can either stay on this theme of responsibility, but the other contrasting theme was freedom as well.
I'll jump in. Hi, would you like to go, Maria? It's okay. All right, I'm Marianne Woods Murphy. It's great to be on the call with all of you. I've enjoyed listening to your comments so far. I'm a lifelong educator. In 2010, I was given this big award, New Jersey Teacher of the Year. The reason that's significant here is that I became involved after 28 years of teaching in the policy realm. It later led me to the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. and work in the policy, travel nationally, and it sort of blew my mind to go from a classroom experience for many years and then go into understanding what national policy looks like, and then talking to teachers about that policy and serving as a kind of liaison to teachers and also to policymakers to help them understand the lived experience of teachers and the impact of policy on the classroom level. So since that time, I've gone back into the classroom. I live in New Jersey, and then I became involved about 8 years ago in talent development. I worked as a coordinator of gifted and talented services in New Jersey and Nutley, and began to wonder what does it mean to develop talent? Who has talent? How can we find it? How can education best ignite those areas of people that are most alive? And last year, last year, I started a consulting company where I would work with schools and districts to do talent development. And for the past year, I've been traveling back and forth to Barcelona, Spain, to work with a K-12 school. I've gone 10 times and everything just abruptly stopped with coronavirus, on how might we, from kindergarten through 12th grade, change the heterogeneous classroom experience to be a place that allows space for the freedom to develop sparks and interests that students have, and how can we meet those sparks and interests that we observe and become talent development scouts as educators so that we can connect students to the rich world that we've learned about and the people we know to help them grow in ways that are really significant. So when this virus hit, I live with my family. I live with my husband, Joe, who's a philosophy chair at Dwight Englewood, friend of Ariel's. That's the connection. And I and my own daughter and her boyfriend's here. She's a school counselor. I've got 2 grandchildren who are doing the online schooling. And the wondering I have through all of this, coming fresh from this talent development focus and being catapulted into a kind of coronavirus strange new world, is where is the talent development happening, right? So what I'm seeing as a grandparent and / parent, another adult, is lots of requirements and lots of responsibilities, lots of accountability. But I see teachers struggling with figuring out, or I don't even know if the question has been posed about how might we use this opportunity or challenge to find out what students are interested in, to help parents develop these interests in the home. My goodness, it feels like a golden opportunity. Can't we do science through baking with your family? Can't we do, figure out like a quick interest survey to find out what students are interested in and dedicate? What about 4th grade being the time when you write a novel that incorporates a few other big ideas? So I feel like the accountability part of science, what John talked about with trying to find a way to be accountable, but also provide students with opportunities. What Joe talked about, like not meeting the needs of or not being able to accomplish the 2nd grade demands of a curriculum. I feel like this is crazy because not your feelings, but I feel like this is crazy because we are not using an opportunity that's very, very clear to me. I also in my work with 2 underserved districts in New Jersey, Plainfield and Irvington, and I help educators use teacher leadership to create great things. And they are so bogged down, these teachers, with so many demands and requirements that seem to me not core, to be kind, to the point of this opportunity. The opportunity that we have is amazing. We're in a place where our hearts are wide open. People have experienced loss. People have experienced pain. We are changed because we're irrevocably changed. Why wouldn't this be the perfect time to find out what people are actually interested in and what their deepest wonderings are? So I leave you with that.
Thanks, Mary. Maria?
Hello, everyone. I'm a teacher and a psychologist, and my deep feeling of responsibility to the parents as a teacher brought me to do my research in philosophical communities of parents for years. But through this pandemic, I realized that my responsibility as a parent, myself, I have a 12th grade, 9th grade, and a 7th grade. I came here in New Jersey a few months ago on my own. My husband is still back in Greece. And through this whole situation, my responsibility as a parent has become a priority above all other responsibilities because I'm the only one here for them. So that's my.
Thank you, Maria. Jan?
Hi, my name is Jan Belser, and I am a parent of a 7-year-old daughter, and I work from home from before coronavirus. I'm the chief of staff in the technology department of a financial institution, and I've had the great both freedom and responsibility to be able to work from home for the majority of the last 10 years. So that part of this has been an interesting thing for me to observe is my entire company moving to a work from home scenario and experiencing to have the lens of someone who's done it for a long time and to see it through their eyes as they're now all living with their families, and vast majority of them are parents who are working from home. So that's an interesting time to observe them, people grappling with what's most important, and to see them rationalizing family time above work time, and just being honest about it has been really humanizing experience, to see everyone just be honest about what they're going through, and what they're juggling, and choosing family first. And I'm really grateful to have that, to great coworkers who are sharing that experience. And as a parent, I've been riding this crazy roller coaster of, watching a first grader go through a separation from her physical school and all her friends. She's an only child, so as a single child in a house, I think that's been interesting to see her transition to a world without other kids. And her, journey of restriction of physical freedom, but I think a new freedom to, like what Marianne was discussing, explore what she's really interested in. And my initial struggle against that, because of what I thought were her responsibilities to complete her school activities, and then really loving her, showing me that maybe the freedom she needs is to be able to play piano all day for one day, because that's what she's interested in. So I've been a little humbled by that, and allowing myself to let go of what I thought was my responsibility, to force her to do the work, and let her kind of lead her own journey, while at the same time making sure she learns how to read and do arithmetic. So there's a balance there.
Thanks, Jan. I think, Abe, you're the only one we haven't heard from yet.
Yeah, hi. My name's Abram, and I have known and worked with Ariel and Joe for the last few years while I was studying my philosophy and education master's degree at Teachers College. So I have some practice doing philosophy with children. I did some philosophy with children, with middle schoolers through the Young Philosophers group. I've also been involved in the New York City High School Ethics Bowl. So I'm really interested in working with middle schoolers and high schoolers to do the kinds of practices that we're doing right here. My interest in philosophy and in education as a practice came out of interest in these questions around freedom and responsibility in education. And I had arrived at studying philosophy because of my interest in free schooling and unschooling and these sorts of things. So I'm interested to follow up Marianne's lines of inquiry.
Hey, can you say a little bit about what that is for those of us who might not know?
Sure. So let's see. I'll just stick to unschooling because that's the term that I think is most confusing. So unschooling being an approach for a very kind of libertarian approach to homeschooling, where the idea is that they're not mandating the kinds of activities that are given from state curricula, but that the students and essentially choose and find and direct their own pathways through their learning processes. So I've thought with and worked with students to try and do that, to do this kind of talent development scouting that Marianne sort of suggested. And that is a full-time job, working with even a handful of teenagers to help them find what's interesting. So I'm also wary of, on the other hand, expecting that teachers could do this. I feel like it's a separate kind of job. So I could definitely talk about that. Other things that I have just written down that I'd like to mention, I guess. So currently I've gone back into work as an ESL teacher. I started again at the start of this year. And so all of our courses, all my teaching has gone online, but the student population I'm working with is not college students, and it's not high school, middle school students. I'm dealing with international adults. And a lot of these students are finding, there's a lot of difficulties because the majority of my students are international students here on student visas. And I've had to sort of put aside the teaching objectives to do kind of group therapy and support, because I've had students where they've had friends and family members die. I had a student who was working as an essential worker for ride sharing apps and delivery, and he had his car stolen while he was working, and he wasn't allowed to be working technically on his visa, so he was working illegally. So he had to deal with the police and trying to so yeah, there's all sorts of crazy outlying cases and things that we're all getting exposure to that can help us think through some of these problems. Yeah, I'm happy to stop there.
Great, thanks, Abe. So in our chat, I have placed the questions that I kind of seen emerging, and I just put them there so that all of us can look at them together. I'm gonna read them out loud and say who I think they're inspired by. But as I'm reading and coming up with these questions, if there are any questions that kind of bubbled up for you, either from your experience that I didn't capture or that you were inspired by hearing by others, let me know and I'll put it in the chat box too for us to consider. So the first one is, how much duty do we owe to others and how much liberty should we give up? And to me, that came from Joel's comments and also Mark's comments about giving to others. What are my responsibilities as a teacher or a parent, and what and how should we prioritize these? So those came to me through John and Maria and Joe and also Jan. I have, what opportunities are being overlooked that we should be giving attention to? That came from Marianne, Jan, and Abram. And then Abe, I think your last bit I hadn't put down into a question yet, but seems to be something or like how exercising our responsibilities or our freedom somehow is being punished or criminalized or hindered.
Yeah, I was just thinking what freedom means for different people as well. And also on top of that, I'm also a non-citizen of the US. I was actually scheduled to have a green card interview about 2 weeks ago that was canceled and is now canceled indefinitely. So I'm also experiencing how that impinges on my potential freedoms.
Are there any other questions that people would like us to consider for the second part of our discussion?
You know, I am actually interested about Marion's, I had to write it down. What is it? Talent development. I'd never heard of that before from within the educational sphere. And so I wonder actually when thinking about, you know, I can see how she's pushing talent development towards, you know, you have the freedom to figure out the kinds of things you're good at, and we should be pushing you towards developing those talents. I guess I'm curious about how that might work out in a post-corona world, right? Like what does that talent evaluation look like? Because I think that's the same sort of way we can identify, you know, student strengths and weaknesses to be able to help them get across the line, right? We can identify potential future career paths for them, again, off of kind of getting a sense of what they're interested in, right? So I wonder what that looks like in terms of, I guess, mentoring students, right? Talent development sounds a little bit like mentorship to me. I wonder what that does look like, you know, going forward in the world.
Yeah, I mean, Ariel is a protocol. Can I jump in?
Yeah, I think we want to just start generating questions before we jump into like a discussion. So I wrote, how can we use this time to develop talent, and how might this help us in the future? John, to kind of capture what you're saying. Does anyone else have a pressing question that they want to be considered?
I can speak. Yeah. Having almost 10 years experience teaching hybrid, I still was blindsided by having to switch the syllabus to to an online environment when the semester had already started. I was ready. The students were not ready. And so it becomes incumbent upon the instructor to hold these students by the hand. All of a sudden, our college students become 10-year-olds again and need to be, undo the bad habits that they may have at college by thinking they can take off willy-nilly from the classroom, figuring out how to make sure that they do attend online because we're not watching them, of course, anymore. So we discovered how important it was to watch their body language and their facial expressions and their willingness to buy into the classroom experience, because we don't get that as much anymore. So it's been a real challenge for me to turn my syllabus inside out and figure out how to engage, and I think I did it quite successfully, how to engage the students, even though we're meeting periodically online and not always in Zoom. So it's been a thrilling challenge. So whether we go back in the fall face to face or virtually, it's going to, I mean, my syllabus will never be the same again, really.
Yeah, so Margaret, seems like you're interested in the question about responsibilities as a teacher and like how that changes what you and how you.
I do. I mean, it's yes, it's easy to say, well, it's the student's responsibility to keep up or whatever, but really, how do we ignite these kids? How do we use our flipped classroom experiences to really teach? And as Marianne and others were saying, I mean, my God, the world is our oyster now, really. And we couldn't put any more Band-Aids on American education. I mean, it needed something like this to remind us, that just like with religion, the church is not real. The church is not real estate. So it is with the university. That's also not real estate anymore. We need to crack these kids open, and we need to be the best of ourselves to do that. And that's something that we're discovering.
All right, so for the sake of time, I'd like us to pick a question, and the question might result in us picking and going down other paths with other questions. But in order for us to model what community of inquiry can look like, and especially like how this practice can work with children and for you and your other communities and groups, I'd like us to kind of fit to what I call the plain vanilla, which is at this point in the process, we would vote on a question as a group, and the question that has the most votes, if we're going to use the democratic process, would be the one that we would start with. So in your chat box, you'll see all of the questions. I'd like you to take a minute to read through and pick the two that you would feel most interested in talking about right now. Maybe interested because you feel strongly about it. Maybe interested because you hadn't thought about it before. Maybe you're interested because something someone said sounded really interesting and you want to hear more about that. 2 questions. Just think about it, and then I'm going to read them out loud and we'll raise our hand. And Abram just has added another question for consideration. After an era of move fast and break things, what does freedom to fail look like? Can you give me a thumbs up in your reaction box when you're ready to go? Or just a regular thumbs up. Okay. Raise your hand or reaction if you want to talk about how much duty do we owe to others. Okay. Raise your hand if you'd like to talk about how much liberty should we give up. Raise your hand for what are my responsibilities as a teacher and parent, and how should we prioritize those? Okay. That's 5, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. What opportunities are being overlooked that we should give attention to? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. What does freedom mean for different people in this situation? How can we use this time to develop talent? And after an era of move fast, break things, what does freedom to fail look like? 1, 2. Okay, so it seems like maybe other people were paying better attention, that we have a tie, like 5 and 5. And that was for what are my responsibilities as a teacher and parent? How do I prioritize it? And what was the other one? I wasn't writing it down.
Opportunities,
Joseph has said.
overlooked opportunities.
Yeah.
What opportunity? So they're right next to each other in the chat. Okay, what opportunities are being overlooked? Okay, so tie vote. You get 1 vote. Question is, do we want to talk about what are my responsibilities, or what opportunities are being overlooked, and what should we be giving our attention to? So pick one. Raise your hand if you want to talk about responsibilities. 1, 2, 3, 4. Raise your hand if you'd like to talk about opportunities. Oh no! I have to be the tiebreaker? That's not supposed to happen.
Or are the questions really that different?
Are they that different?
Sides of the same question.
Can you talk, say a little bit more about how you see the questions connecting, Jan?
Well, I guess, what are my responsibilities and duties as a parent or a teacher, and what are the missed opportunities? To me, it's almost the same question. Unless you see your duties and responsibility is to stick to exactly the way things were before. If you see any chance for change, to me, that's what are the opportunities that we're missing and how can we pursue them? So.
Okay, so we can think about how we could merge these two questions. So Marianne suggested, how about rephrasing it as how should we balance our responsibilities with opportunities? Or we could do, as Jan suggested, what are our responsibilities to not overlook opportunities? Does anyone feel strongly about one version or the other?
Wouldn't it be up to the individual to help form that same question within their little mini group? I mean, it'll be provocative to see what we come up with. Interpret the question.
I'm kind of the mindset, I like to have like a question to anchor. It makes it easier for me to facilitate.
How about, is it an expanding universe or a shrinking universe?
Okay, so how about, I'm going to propose that we do the question, what are our responsibilities to not overlook opportunities right now? And you could say that we don't have a responsibility. You could take the opposite position, okay? So ground rules. Thank you, Abe. This is very hard to do while on video call. For some reason, I find it much easier to multitask question generation and type writing in person. So the ground rules for this discussion are, first, I know that everybody's time is precious and that we promised we'd be done at 12. So if you need to leave, feel free to leave, no feelings hurt. But I imagine that this is probably gonna go until like 12:15 to 12:30. So if you can stay, awesome. Second, as a facilitator, I'm not telling you what I think or how to think or where to go. My goal is to help make sure that the discussion is moving forward in a way that the group as a collective wants to move forward. And so I'll be asking how we anchor back to the question, and I'll jump in if I'm feeling confused, because that might mean other people are feeling confused, but simply only to help as a moderator. One person should talk at a time. Be mindful of stepping in and stepping back so that everyone has a chance to talk. And the goal of our discussion is to try to figure out the most reasonable answer to this question at this moment. And we might have many answers, and they might all be tentative, but our goal is to critique and think through these answers carefully so that we can at least eliminate the ones that we know that don't make sense to us right now, given the information and our experiences. So freedom to agree and disagree is important. We're not attacking people, we're just criticizing and evaluating ideas. Freedom to talk. So once you're done talking, the next person can talk. We're not going to call on people because that's a little awkward over Zoom. So would someone like to start us off with their initial idea of like what are responsibilities to not overlook opportunities right now?
I don't mind opening. Oh, go ahead, Jill.
Oh, go ahead, Joel.
I think that a lot of this question brought me back to what to Joseph Beal said about the kind of pressures a parent puts on themselves to kind of do everything just right, to not miss the opportunity to do everything perfect for your children. I'm not entirely sure that within the concept of what our responsibilities are to our children in this time, that doing everything just so it kind of falls within the parameters of this. I mean, I think each individual person needs to find what the perfect thing is for their children. And this is an opportunity to actually find that, since you're actually spending more time with them and actually seeing what their natural inclinations are, or guiding them through sort of any insecurities or anxieties they have because of the pandemic. In terms of overlooking an opportunity, what our responsibility is to not overlook it, I'm not really sure exactly what my thoughts are on that. I guess I guess my feeling is, yeah, I'll pass on that aspect of it.
Okay, so if somebody would like to build on what Joel is saying or provide an answer to the second part that he's not so sure. Go ahead, Joel. We're not going to call on people, or Joe, we're not going to call on people.
Yeah, I guess I am building on what Joel said. In my initial thought that there's, and this ties in, I think, to what Marianne said at the beginning, that you feel that there are these opportunities and you don't want to miss them, but at the same time, I think there's the pressure, anxiety. I'm personally experiencing these things, and so innovation and new ideas and trying to approach education in the way that I think it ought to be done when I am feeling normal. Now all of a sudden it just seems very, very safe. Just do what they need to do, so they get these remote learning schedules and assignments, and okay, let's just do it. Let's, we're trying to have the regular school day, but remotely, and so from 9 o'clock to 9:47, we're going to be doing some math stuff. And even like, while, I'm of two minds. I'm one mind is like, this is crazy. we should be completely doing something different. And then I'm also, let's just do this. Let's just get this, let's happen. And there's this anxiety, there's this frustration that builds up in this tension. And I'm certainly feeling it. I'm suspecting that other parents are feeling it, maybe educators as well. I've got the two roles, as a number of you do. As an educator, I want to change things, and at the same time, okay, let's how much of it we can just keep tight, and just try to replicate, which just leaves me more frustrated, because I ultimately agree with Marianne. It's like, we're missing opportunities here. So I feel like I've got responsibilities in both ways. I've got responsibilities as like, look, as someone who is committed to education and committed to completely believe in the importance of kind of a more philosophical approach to education, particularly pre-college. Here's an opportunity, and I owe it to my belief in this to follow up on it. And yet I also feel like I've got this responsibility to have my children not lose their minds by, exposing them to different things. So I see people want to get in here, so I'll stop there.
I want to jump in on what Joel and Joseph were talking about. I totally understand the desire to follow the schedule and respond to the demands of school. We're doing it in this house too. Similarly, teachers in their classrooms are often asked to chunk off the disciplines and do particular tasks during particular times. And my challenge has been over the past year or even beyond that, when I worked with talent development in a district, was helping people figure out how within the rigid structures of scheduling and demands, how can you create a space for talent development or connecting your urges, your impulses, your desires, your interests to something. So sometimes what I found is like Ariel's protocol, let's narrow down the question, let's do it. Sometimes in with your children maybe, or with children and students in your class, it's simply building in time for conferring, right? Like asking a question in a small chunk of time, dedicating that small chunk of time to asking things like, what part of this interests you? This thing that we just did, this required thing. If you had more time, what would you want to dig deeper into? Or asking if they have a writing assignment, maybe plucking something from that thing that they were interested in and asking a question related to that. So what I've noticed, in a typical classroom, like in an elementary school classroom, it might be a teacher creating a space for just talking with students from time to time, just asking a couple of questions and then providing an opportunity to give the answers. So what I've noticed in K-12 settings particularly is there's no time built in, right? And so, most typically no time built in, and in parent or grandparent or caregiver situation, everybody's so stressed out because they're teaching mixed fraction multiplication and they don't even remember it, and we're looking up stuff on Khan Academy to figure it out, so we're not like fools for our kids that we're trying to serve. How can we ask? Well, we could say, this is really puzzling, I wonder what this might relate to in our lives, and then waiting days and days and days until the kid finally says, oh my gosh, like we were making a cake or we were doing this, and this is where we needed to understand this concept. So small things, building it in chunks of time is what I would recommend on that. What I've seen works.
All right, so I'd like to take a moment and to just distill the connections that I'm seeing between Joel, Joe, and Marianne. And if everyone is seeing a connection that I'm not seeing, please jump in. Or if I'm totally off base, also correct me. But it seems to me that, like Marianne, you're offering a solution, which is to create time, a dedicated time that connects to what Joel says that we need to do, which is using the opportunity to see and meet the needs of our students or children. And that the way to do that, Marianne, is you're suggesting is time for conferring. And Joe, that might connect to your idea around how do we create space for innovation, because that time for conferring might be that the need of those people in that moment is to innovate, and perhaps maybe the need, if we're thinking about Joel and the different needs of different people that he brought up, it might be the need to just do school as is, or maybe the need is to rethink what my values are that you were talking about, like how do I follow through. That space and time provides us the time to think through our values so that we can commit. So that's how I'm seeing all three of you kind of connect your ideas. Bring it back to the group. Does anyone want to add anything? Disagree with anyone?
I would like to just say that I remember how repressive it was to teach in Newark public schools and how you were micromanaged there. And there's more freedom, obviously, at the university. But this is the perfect Montessori moment of the new paradigm shift, because as educators, and I guess most of you are involved with the younger grades, you'll never have more freedom than this moment. You'll never have more of an opportunity to make an impact and to really guide this new paradigm. It's very exciting. It's a gift. For the last 150 years, we've been working with a model and putting Band-Aids on it, And now I just have this feeling that when we come back together, there'll be so much more appreciation for the fact that we can look each other in the face with less than 6 feet between us. And I think we're the part that's going to come next. And I'll leave it there.
Just to jump in, something I've noticed, and I think a range of comments we've had, is that the opportunity that we have, either as educators formally or as educators, as parents, with our kids. I am childless, so I know nothing about that. But we have to bring our classes to life, right? We have to animate the education in a way that makes it make sense for whomever it is we're providing it for, right? So it's tough I imagine it's going to be tougher to do that in this environment, perhaps than it would be in the traditional classroom environment. For some things, or perhaps for other things, it'd be very easy to motivate. Ethical questions are abound right now, right? So if you're doing anything having to deal with ethics, a whole lot of quick and easies about, how is the world operating right now? Should persons of this group be receiving the kind of treatment that they're having with regards to, not receiving enough care for COVID, or perhaps receiving too much care for COVID? I would wonder, I would wonder about how we will be trying to bring the class to life more, and what that does look like. I remember, Joe, you mentioned innovation, right? I'm curious to see what kind of educational and pedagogical innovations will come, because we're gonna want to animate the work as much as possible. And I do wonder, I'm thinking like of the COVID future, of that post-COVID future. What does that look like to animate the work? Say if we're having to do education across Zoom in a more semi-permanent basis. You know what I mean? I'm a bit nervous, actually, for how that translates effectively. It might be just, not that I'm skeptical, but it might just be my lack of experience. But I do wonder, about the opportunity to bring the class to life. I think that's something that's been permeating around all of our comments about how to be able to be effective educators. It's got to resonate in some way, shape, or form. And so I guess I'm wondering about that opportunity specifically, about how we take advantage of that in these times.
And John, it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, the opportunity is both now and in the future.
Yeah. I think now is where we're going to be able to get some of that technological innovation, some of that innovation, and in the future, this is where we're going to get to test it out and see what kinds of, how well did it serve the purpose we're looking for? Where do we need to adjust, edit, scrap, try again, and move forward?
Maria, do you want to join?
Yeah, I was wondering, doesn't this opportunity and the whole situation bring into the surface the need to connect with the parents, because we need them to help us work with the students? And because that has always been my thought for years, I feel like now it's even more important to bring parents closer to us, the teachers, so that we can really make our classroom alive. We cannot do that without the parents.
And one thing that it kind of ties all of these, at least to me, is how can we, I have two thoughts. One is a fear that when classes resume in person at some point, will they put this all behind them and go back to exactly the way things were in an attempt to bring comfort and stability? And is that, like you said, is that, I think we're all struggling with, is that what we are trying to achieve by providing stability and a sense of comfort, or, will people latch on to the opportunity that's available? And the second thought I was having while listening to everyone was, is there an opportunity, or is there a risk, or both, that we are only addressing one type of student in this way? I think there, like what Joel said in the very beginning, there are, maybe many types of students, but large category students who can really embrace some sort of distance learning and freedom to explore on their own, whereas others are grappling with the lack of structure and that's maybe not an environment that they can really blossom in. And so, is there an opportunity in the future to, maybe through parent engagement and closer engagement with parents, provide more nuanced methods that allow for different types of students to pursue their interests and paths in different ways, instead of one rote method?
Great. I think Abe wanted to jump in, but Jan, I appreciate how you connected with both John and Maria. That was helpful.
Yeah, so I just want to speak a little bit from my experience working with unschoolers and in Agile Learning Centers, for example. So one of the paradoxes, or one of the issues that comes up inevitably, is that, related to our question of freedom and responsibility here, as we increase the amount of freedoms that individuals have, we're actually shifting the responsibility for their learning onto them, potentially. So a short story of like an encounter I had in an Agile Learning Center, which is like a collective homeschooling environment. One of the kids was refusing to participate in activities and just decided he didn't want to do any of the offerings that were being suggested. And the facilitator at the time was having trouble trying to motivate the student. The student wanted to not be motivated, wanted to be self-directed. And another kid said, look, you need to just, if this kid doesn't want to do anything, then that's his choice. If he wants to choose to do nothing, then that's his choice. And then the question was, well, what's going to happen if he chooses to do nothing, quote unquote, productive for, I don't know, 5 years or something, whether or not that could actually ever happen. But the answer was, well, if he chooses not to do anything, then it's his fault when he does not learn anything. And so this is like one of the ongoing challenges to more independent or self-directed learning, is that as adults, as parents, as teachers, we still have a responsibility to make sure that they're motivated. And the challenge is, how do you lead the horse to water and make them drink? So my question is, for like, what are our responsibilities to not overlook opportunities? I thought I had, as Joel and Joe were discussing, is this idea of, our responsibility can only be to be brave about trying out some new things and exposing ourselves to new things. We can't make ourselves not overlook opportunities. There's going to be all sorts of tensions for us as educators, as parents, and trying to find a balance. And the only responsibility the personal responsibility I think I could buy would be that we have to check in with ourselves about making brave decisions and experimenting and seeing what works.
So that brings me back to this idea of dedicated time. So not just dedicated time as a community checking in, but also dedicated time for us as individuals to check in with ourselves.
Yeah, I think a reflective practice for the individual is going to be necessary. But my point, I guess, was more that if we took this idea of everyone is now responsible for their children's education, or for you're responsible for the learning conditions that you have no control over, the coronavirus, and that everyone is now having to remote learn or hybrid learn or whatever. These things are beyond your control, but you do have the control of the power over finding small freedoms, small moments of opportunity that you can be brave in yourself. That's the responsibility.
To piggyback off of that, I forget who had said it, but someone mentioned, or it might have been Joe, that we have that parents want to. It was either Joe or Joel, but they mentioned parents want to try to take advantage of as many opportunities as possible and not leave any of those opportunities behind. I think here what Abe was saying about that responsibility to take the small moments to be brave. That's one way of avoiding, say, that perfectionist. I hope I didn't, miss these opportunities, or I hope I didn't avoid these opportunities. And it does end up having to be I have a responsibility to try this out. I know as an educator, philosophy is mostly reading dry materials. I like using multimedia. We got to try this out to see if it works. Right? I got to try it on, see if it fits. It may not work for others. It may work well for me. But I think that's part of that, having that responsibility to run the scientific inquiry for all intents and purposes. We've got an idea, we've got a theory. Let's test it out. We have to be brave, I think, to try to test these things out. And we're in a great space to be creative. Given the scenario we're living in, we should be, I think, exercising as much creativity in our approach to doing education as possible. I think also because it might inform what we do in the future regardless.
So John, I want to take this idea of like small moments to be brave right now, and the idea that we've been talking about moments for us as educators to be brave, and how we animate and motivate our students, for us as parents to have time and space to be brave, to see our child and see what they need and be there for them in that way, and be brave in perhaps blowing up a structure or keeping a structure despite maybe our own initial thoughts about it. The moments to be brave, as Maria was saying, to reach out to parents. But I want to circle back to what Jan raised, which is this concern about the risks and the dangers right now in those moments of being brave, and how do we grapple with that? And also think about pivoting towards the future. So how can we use those small moments to be brave, and thinking about sustaining it to the future? Because I think Jan raised those two concerns that I think are important for us to consider. So does anyone want to take either one of those? So what about the current risks, students who are being left out, things like that, or the future concern about sustainability and not reverting back to status quo?
Yeah, I think one of the things about the future risk that I'm maybe concerned about, and I'm only realizing it now, that if I allow my daughter to have this great experience in self-direction and maybe in self-exploration of interests, even though, so I asked her before this, how does she feel about the lack of her newfound freedom, I guess, in self-directed learning? And she's 7, so just curious what she thought about that. And she's really missing the structure, even though she is very strong-willed and always likes her freedom. So I thought that was an interesting take, that she finds she would prefer the responsibility not be on her to do her assignments and stuff. But I'm afraid that if she learns to embrace that, her freedom, and in more self-directed learning and exploring a topic until it's exhausted in her own mind, and then that freedom is then taken away again, how will that play? And especially at a young age, and then which one is worse, to never have it and to never know that freedom is out there, or to have it and lose it? I mean, I guess that's a age-old question, right? So I think I'd probably rather her have in her mind that freedom is worth finding in any way she can. So maybe make this a space where she has the opportunity to try that on and feel what it's like, and find where she can put it back into her life at some point in the future. So maybe the risk is worth it. Yeah.
Mark, you seem to want to jump in.
Well, God bless you, young parents, for, I mean, the jury is out. And if this virus comes back around in the fall, it's going to be the status quo. And I see these parent collectives being formed to figure out how to get together in your neighborhoods and teach online, yes, but using the parents as coming together, and you're not in it by yourself, but with other parents who have similar age children. It's just amazing that I mean, we're taking these baby steps, but we don't even know how it's going to be. And these questions that Jan mentioned about her daughter, I mean, wow, it's so awesome to think that this is just going to explode into these new types of young people and with these responsibilities and how they handle it. I'm excited as a senior citizen. I took for granted 30 years ago the school system where I was able to put my kids on a bus, you know what I mean? And now look at this hands-on that we have to have. Now moving into the time when I'm having grandchildren, I wouldn't wish this on my children, but it is on my children. So it's exciting, and I'm glad I'm still here to participate. It's very exciting, and let's not, like we said, small moments to be brave. We are there, you know, and every day. And so God bless you all. I'm gonna have to back out actually to get to another meeting, but I hope I get invited again. This has been just wonderful.
Great, thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
So I think what Mark might have just added is like risks for whom, you know, so Jan's been talking about risks for her daughter, and Mark's, you know, not removed from that, and as a person who doesn't have kids in the system, there are different risks, or maybe not risks, for what taking moments of bravery in rethinking schooling looks like. So are there other like ways that risks are infiltrating this idea of taking moments of thinking about how to be brave and have courage right now that we haven't been thinking about?
I actually, when Jan mentioned that we've got different kinds of students, the first thing I thought of was, oh, that's right. We have students with different, skill sets, with different needs. And we've also got students with different, say, resources available to them. And so Mark's story about the parent collectives getting together, the first thing I just thought of is, you know, certain zip codes with certain parents, those educations are likely to be significantly more robust in ways that other zip codes with other parents just will not have access to. For example, some of the, in the poorer zip codes, I imagine some of those parents are, what do we call them? Heroes. What's the phrase for them?
Essential
workers. Yeah.
Thank you, right? So it's easier to do some parent education when you don't necessarily have to be in the job for 8 hours during this time, right? I can imagine that we're going to, as we think about the different kinds of needs that students have, it is important for us to keep a nuanced view on this, that is not just, whether they need oversight or more self-direction. It's not just if they, score well on these tests or poorly on these tests. It's not just if they have these interests or those interests. It's also the structures around them that help them get access to develop those skills, interests, desires, etc. So certainly that's got to be something, I think, like, that's going to be a risk as we're talking about risks and opportunities. You don't want to treat the more downtrodden as the guinea pigs. Is kind of concern I tend to have about risks for future development.
Right. The reason the public schools, one of the reasons the public school system is there is to make sure that everyone has a baseline of education that not every parent can provide, or has the time or opportunity, or any myriad of resource choices.
Yeah, I also, in my work, because I work in extremely affluent spaces and extremely underserved groups, I notice a terrific disparity in the amount of freedom that educators have to design the learning experience. So I'm in 2 large urban districts in New Jersey where I help teachers with teacher leadership and ideas. And so often when they have ideas and they want to innovate and they're all excited, they receive central education office mandates to create very scripted and very tight experiences with a high dose of accountability, fear of losing their jobs, and other draconian measures that teachers in more affluent districts and independent schools do not experience. So this is a very important matter because I see no difference really in the children's potential in either space. You have all kinds of students in all kinds of places who bring with them the world of experiences that they have lived, and the teachers can develop the skills, mindset, and resources to meet the emerging needs of those students. However, they are thwarted in an extreme way in more urban districts, particularly in schools predominantly made up of students of color. And I'm outraged by this disparity. It's not only a technological disparity, it's a freedom disparity. And teachers are so beaten up in these areas that they've lost their way to understand that the emperor does have no clothes, that in the central office, there are two people making these decisions. And if you go up a level in state government, it's another three. And if you go federal, it's 5 or 6. And it can be toppled, but it must, but people are so abused by systemic oppression in particularly urban districts that they forget to exercise their freedom.
So I think what Marianne and John have just offered is perhaps how we've been viewing the question up till now, hadn't been considering those structural and systematic structures that, or constraints that either open or close opportunities because they open or close freedoms or the ability to engage those opportunities. So given that, would we have a different answer to for our original question, which is what are our responsibilities to not overlook opportunities if we're being mindful of the structural constraints that many people have? And if so, then what would our answer be? Or what would we add to our answer beyond, where we are now?
Well, I mean, I can't speak to the perspective of someone who's an educator. I can only speak from the perspective of someone who's on the outside watching. And from my perspective, not being on the inside, it seems to me that all of the concerns that John and Marianne raised are completely ignored, and that it seems like the first, in terms of the way you described it and the way I imagine it, is that the first instinct is not education or freedom or liberty, it's control. And even the way it's discussed publicly is, how will this be under control? What will happen to this? How will we massage this so it meets a certain outcome that will look a certain way? And I think you're absolutely right to bring that up. I mean, the idiosyncratic things that parents feel in terms of, doing things properly here and there. The parent is always the first activist in terms of raising a child, but the greater responsibility that you all feel as educators is completely different from what we feel. And I think a larger societal question that you brought up, have you seen anything that has been suggest that anybody is paying attention to those problems or is concerned about them within this pandemic?
I think, Marianne, that was directed at you.
Or John.
Yes, I mean, I work when I go into schools, I work through the Educators Union, the New Jersey Education Association, And what we're focusing on to build community is trauma-informed instruction, right? How can we create systems of support in schools by helping teachers and students understand adverse childhood experiences and difficulties, and how can we create healing opportunities within the space through restorative justice and those types of things. So I've worked at the state government level and the national government level, but now I'm working through the union because I see that this is a lens that a solidarity lens that I see as being fundamentally important in this new age. So it's a beacon of hope.
Maria, do you want to add something? And then I think we're going to need to wrap up. No, it just looked like you were itching to talk. Okay.
Actually, Ariel, could I just, I don't want to derail, but something I just want to come back, excuse me, to something that John said. I think that these moments to be brave and that Abram said, and trying to, and be sensitive to different needs. A fear that John expressed about the medium, to doing this online. I want to echo that a concern, particularly higher ed. Liberal arts, philosophy in particular, these are likely to be the classes that are going to be going online when school comes back. This is likely to be the type of class that is not deemed necessary for people to be in a classroom together. So, like, there's a lack of freedom there. It almost like the technology is going to constrain what we do, and we're going to have to figure out how to meet the needs of different types of students within those constraints, which is unfortunate because there are students where those constraints are not going to be conducive to their learning, and that is a troubling thing. I don't know if that's going to be necessarily the same for like my children. I have a 7-year-old, and I've got elementary, middle school kids. I don't know if it's going to be quite the same there, but certainly I think on the college level, I think that as a philosophy professor, I'm looking at remote learning for a while. That's my suspicion.
So Joe, correct me if I'm misinterpreting, but could this be understood as like another potential risk? So for Jan, it was, a risk of what happens when a student who experiences freedom goes back and loses freedom. But this is a risk of, now that we've established a way of doing it remotely, then the risk is continuing that remotely and the challenges that come up from that.
Yeah, I guess I think that it might be useful to get used to this and to learn and explore how we can reach these different students with their different needs through this medium, which is very, very troubling, particularly when New York City public schools just this past week, 6 weeks into school closing, are still sending out iPads and laptops. What have these students been doing for 6 weeks?
Okay. Yeah.
So the inequities and the imbalances and various students and communities and needs have to be met, yet probably within these technological constraints. We've got to figure that out.
So one of the risks, just so is that we miss the opportunity to fully embrace remote learning to address the inequalities and meet all student needs. And instead we just say, well, we don't need to worry about that because eventually we'll go back to in person.
Yeah, I don't think we should assume that at all.
Okay, so for the sake of for time and not wanting to be cut off with our Facebook and YouTube live streaming, I'm going to try to summarize where we're at, and I'd like to take a few minutes to reflect on like how we did as a community, because that's part of what the practice is about for Community of Inquiry, is the idea that we come together, we talk, and then we reflect and figure out how we can do it better next time. and what we've learned, become self-aware of ourselves and ourselves and community. So it seems like we've come away, and I've appreciated the chat where people have been putting in some key phrases that we're coming away from when we're talking about responsibilities and not overlooking, and the idea that when we talk about not overlooking opportunities, that comes with a sense of pressure, anxiety, questions about accountability and blame and responsibility, and that we seem to be suggesting that we have the freedom and we should have the freedom, and maybe other people need to allow us to have that freedom, whether that's the higher ups, right, in the educational structure, to give us moments to be brave and rethinking how we meet our students or our children, and how we engage our parents and our students in learning, and that we can't overlook the opportunities to think about how we can sustain those changes that we think are important beyond the current moment, and that we can't overlook the opportunities to ask the hard questions about who's being left out and what types of inequalities we're continuing to perpetuate through the structures that we're now recreating or innovating from. Did I miss anything? All right, so let's take a few minutes and talk about how we think we did as a community. So in a community of inquiry, generally we have explicit goals that we set out for ourselves based on what we think the community needs. One of the rules that I said was stepping in and stepping back and making sure that everyone, had space. So can we reflect on whether we thought like that went pretty well, or maybe there's room for improvement? I know Zoom is a challenging platform to feel heard and to listen on. So how did we think we did? Okay. All right, so Abe, can you tell me why you're kind of like
I think that your point about how Zoom is that creates extra obstacles and extra challenges. I mean, this is my first time trying to do a philosophical inquiry on Zoom, and I think it went pretty well. I think everyone's voices came in, and I could see the strengths of like continuing with the same group of people. I'd love to have this conversation go for 3 hours, that sort of feeling. I feel like it could. So yeah, I think we did good.
any other thoughts about hearing voices and participating?
I'll throw in, I don't know if anybody saw it. I think it was yesterday, New York Times. It was on the op-ed pages about how terrible Zoom is. With respect to communicating and education. So you might want to look for that, or maybe I could try to find it and put it in the chat. But this is going to be another element of the challenges of doing remote learning. This is not ideal.
Yeah, as a facilitator, I rely a lot on context cues and body language. So that's why I thought Maria wanted to come in.
Absolutely.
So thinking about challenges to doing this kind of thing online, are there any challenges that you experienced or you thought hindered the conversation more broadly, maybe not something personal, that you would want us to work on in the future to make this discussion more productive? Any tips, strategies, or concerns that you had?
Maybe agree on the prearranged question prior to the meeting.
Yeah, I like that. We have more time for the inquiry if we can come up and do the question generation before, or just bring a question and whoever wants to talk about that question can log on. It's a great idea, Joel. I really liked and appreciated people's chats today. Like when somebody said something that like really resonated. I think moving forward, I would want to figure out how to streamline that so that everyone felt like they knew what was going on and that it could be a way of creating the summary. Because as those things were coming down, I was like, oh yeah, that's what I meant when I wrote this thing on like my page where I was tracking the inquiry. So a group summary through chat seems to be a possibility that I hadn't considered before. Any last thoughts before we end?
I agree with Abe. We can do this again as a group. This was fun. I had a great time with this. I really had a blast.
Me too. I loved it. Great meeting everyone.
Thank you all for making the time, especially on what looks like a very beautiful day, at least here.
Yes, thank you very, very much for all of you joining. And I'd love to do it again as well.
All right, make it happen, Joe. That's on you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a nice
Bye,
day.
everyone.
Stay well.
Have a nice,
Indeed.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe.
bye-bye,
y'all.
everyone.
Be safe.